Hey, hello everyone. Um, this is another set of slides on the series of global health with an emphasis on the cultural series. And we'll discuss about Hofstede's cultural dimension theory as it applies to global health. So Hofstede's cultural dimension theory is a framework for cross-cultural psychology developed by Gert Hofstede. It shows the effects of a society's culture on the values of its members and how these values relate to behavior using a structure derived from statistical factor analysis. Over the years, his study led to 6 cultural dimensions on which countries can be ranked. The 6 factors are power distance, individualism or collectivism, masculinity, femininity, uncertainty, avoidance, long-term, short-term orientation, and restraint or indulgence. These cultural dimensions are one of the most common, widely used, and most frequently cited throughout the cultural context in various disciplines. In the original context, Hofstede put forward 4 dimensions: power distance, individualism, masculinity, and uncertainty avoidance. And later, he added the 5th and 6th dimensions, which are long term orientation and indulgence. The 6 dimensions have been derived by comparing many, but not all, countries in the world. And the findings can be summarized into 6 world maps of the distribution of that dimension. Of course, in reality, can be the reality can be quite a bit difference within the country, and there could be variation within a country as well, even though a country may be characterized by some of these factors falling into one specific category. But still, it's very helpful when you're trying to understand the differences in culture from country to country. So let's go and start digging deeper into these 6 dimensions. So Hofstede's first dimension is the power distance. Power distance measures the extent to which less powerful people within organizations accept and expect that power is not distributed equally. This is exhibited, for example, in the relationship between subordinates and superiors, children and parents, youths and elders. Countries with high power distance are characterized by unequal distribution of income, authoritarian leadership, hierarchical structure, while countries with low power distance demonstrate an equal distribution of income, power, and more pluralistic leadership. Here you can see this map in dark green, countries that have a significance power distance score as compared to countries that have a lower power distance score. So the high power distance score, as we mentioned, there's a greater difference between the superior and the subordinates. So it's a more authoritarian leadership as compared to countries that have a more pluralistic leadership expressed in lighter green. And on this side, you can see Mexico, for example, and China relatively to score to the higher end, a little bit more authoritarian, including India, whereas Spain is in between. US, it's slightly lower than Spain, and Germany is further in here. Of course, countries in the Scandinavian country are probably even further to the left because it's a more pluralistic society. The second dimension is individualism or collectivism. And individualism is defined as the extent to which individuals tie or lose the opposite of collectivism. People in the individualistic societies prefer to follow their own goals, achievements, freedoms, and self-interest, and governments have limited influence on individuals' actions. In contrast, in a collectivistic society or culture, people are integrated and subordinated to groups, often family-based, which require loyalty and the performance of individuals is aimed at the group's goal. Here we can see at the very extreme on one side, USA to be very individualistic, the score is much higher, whereas in here we have China, where the score is in the lower end, more collective types of thinking in the society. And then in between, we have India and Spain that have there are in between the two extremes. So, the map also shows the other countries and where they may be lying with respect to individualism or collectivism. The third dimension is masculinity or femininity. So masculinity is described as a preference for achievements, accomplishments, personal benefits, wealth, the materialism of status, and ambitions in society. The opposite represents a predilection for cooperation, modesty, concerns for the weak, and a high standard of living. Women in their respective society display different values, of course. In feminine cultures, they share an equal modest and caring attitude with men. Women are somewhat competitive and assertive in high masculine societies, but significantly less than men. So here we can see the score where we have, for example, Mexico and Germany scoring towards like higher end, and Spain somewhere in between in this country depicted previously. You can also see in here, for example, China scores very high. It's a very masculine dominated society. Japan also is very high, extremely masculine dominated society. On the other hand, we have the Scandinavian country in here that are somewhat on the other spectrum, and some of the countries, especially in Africa, may also be display a lot of feminine structure characteristic as well. The fourth dimension is uncertainty avoidance, and uncertainty avoidance explores the uncertain circumstances and tolerance of ambiguity in society, and the extent to which people can manage unknown, surprising, and unidentified situations. Countries with high uncertainty avoidance index try to minimize everything by strict rules and laws and safety and security measures. In uncertainty accepting societies, they typically impose fewer regulations, are more accustomed to ambiguity, and the environment flows more freely. Here in this chart in here, we can see the index relatively high for Mexico and Spain, where they typically would like to avoid uncertainties, whereas in China, India, and US, it's a little bit more to the left, where they're more open to accepting uncertainty. And here you can see the other countries and how they compare with each other. A fifth dimension is short-term versus long-term orientation. Long-term orientation reveals how people present future-oriented perspectives instead of short-term views. So essentially, countries that are thinking more about long-term versus short-term. So short-term oriented societies specify that traditions are respected and upheld, whilst steadfastness is admired. Long-term orientation societies view adaptation and situational realistic problem solving as essential. Countries with long-term orientations continue to develop and achieve economic success, while short-term based countries usually have very little or no economic development. Here we can see countries with a long-term perspective and view as defined in here. So here you have China, you have Germany, you have Mexico with a little bit more long-term perspective. And on the other hand, you have short-term perspective countries that are in green, US, Canada, some of the European countries, as well as India, have more short-term orientation in this index. The final mention is indulgence. So indulgence versus restraint. So indulgence describes the free fulfillment of human life related to life's fun and enjoyment. Related to life's fun and enjoyment. The opposite society controls the gratification of needs and regulates it through strict societal rule. So you have Mexico in here that is very in scores very high in this indulgence score, whereas China is more restrained and scores much lower in this indulgence score. And we have Spain and US somewhere in between, US leaning a bit more to the right in this score. The application of the six dimensions, Hofstede six dimensions, we can see it applied in many global health cultural contexts and studies as well. Two readings have been assigned. One is by Liu, 2022 et al. In this global study, um, um, was conducted during COVID-19 vaccination campaign. And this map that the authors depicted is showing vaccine hesitancy. So they used Facebook on 11.1 million Facebook users, and they asked one question that is mapped in here. And the question read as follows. If a vaccine to prevent COVID-19 were offered to you today, would you choose to get vaccinated? A score of 1 would be yes, definitely. 2 would be yes, probably. 3 would be no, probably. And 4 would be no, definitely not. So essentially, a score of 4 would indicate higher vaccine hesitancy because they would not want to get vaccinated. And a score of 1 or closer to 1 would be where they're more open to vaccination campaigns. Do remember that this study was conducted right at the end of 2020. Exactly the question was posed on December 21st, 2020. At that time, we only had three vaccines that were approved, which is the Pfizer, Moderna, and AstraZeneca in the Western world. And there were, I think, a Chinese as well as a Russian vaccine that was also approved in their respective countries. However, they were not available for shipment. So at the same time, cases were rising and the number of deaths were also rising all over the countries, despite um, um, like as the vaccination studies revealed that these were approved. So these questions were posed right at that time. And so in the map, we can see that countries that were that have a score of 4 or closer to 4 are countries shown in purple, dark purple, or light purple. And then countries that have a higher vaccination hesitancy are countries that are shown in lighter color, um, 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 more like having pink and light pink color. Those are countries that have a higher vaccine hesitancy. Sorry, those are the countries that are more open to vaccination, whereas the darker color have higher vaccine hesitancy. Another assigned reading is the Delfand et al. 2021 study. And this study also applies this Hofstede cultural framework. And it looked at cultural tightness and defined cultural tightness by using the parameters, the dimension mentioned by Hofstede. And so countries across the so the authors in here show that cultural variation in the tightness of social norms helps to explain collective health outcomes during a global pandemic. So nations with high level of cultural tightness were better able to limit cases and death than nations that were looser. So you can see in here that the score with respect to cases, higher number of deaths, lower cases, lower number of deaths, and then the respective countries that are represented in this location with respect to high cases, low cases, high death, and low death. And you can see on the right axis, which is the specific indicator, which is this tightness indicator. So the author suggests that tight cultures might be more effective in dealing with COVID-19 because they are more readily they more readily adopt cooperative behaviors. When groups are under threat, norms for cooperation evolve much faster in tight societies as compared to loose cultures, which result in higher survival rates as well. So not all loose cultures did poorly, um, uh, and not all tight cultures were successful at limiting cases and death during COVID-19. Yet this result show that cultural looseness can be a liability during collective threat. And we've seen countless of examples in some countries where people didn't want to put their mask on or didn't want to get vaccinated, even though putting mask on would protect the spread of disease in collectively in the society, or getting vaccinated would also help other more vulnerable individuals who would be unable to get vaccinated because of health conditions. So this is quite interesting, and I highly suggest that you read this. So that's all from this set of slides. Thank you.